Section 3, Father Arsenios. His life in the world. Upbringing. Not long after Francis received the great gift of prayer of the heart, divine providence sent him another great gift of incalculable worth. In accordance with Elder Daniel's wishes, God sent to Francis, who was still a layman, a companion, the sanctified Father Arsenios, who became his beloved co-ascetic until his death. It is impossible to write about Elder Joseph without mentioning Father Arsenios, because from the time they met until his death, they lived together as brothers. They were never apart. They never exchanged cold words. They never allowed anything to come between them. They had so much concord and compassion for each other that it was as if they were one soul in two bodies. And what was amazing was that their deep love never degenerated into boldness. Father Arsenios did not have the mental keenness that Elder Joseph had. He was very simple and proved to be a great ascetic, a perfect disciple, and a heavenly man who knew how to pray. In brief, he was a Hesychas with watchfulness on par with the Holy Fathers of old. The sanctified Father Arsenios was born in 1886 in Samsun, northern Turkey. His pious parents, Demetrius and Soteria G., named him Athanasios. When Father Arsenios was 12 years old, his large family took refuge in the Caucasus from the Turkish persecutions. This is why the languages he knew were Pontic Greek, Turkish, and Russian. His knowledge of Standard Greek was minimal. Anastasios' grandfather was a living example of a priest with great love and patience. His father was also a priest and was so holy that he cast out demons by his prayers. His mother was also the child of a priest. It was in this blessed family that little Anastasios grew up. His pious mother instilled in her children virtue and the desire for prayer. This is why he and his little sister, Parthena, had an ardent desire for monasticism from early childhood. His older brother, Leonidas, also wanted to become a monk. His parents, though, were unaware of his monastic aspiration, and they arranged for Leonidas to marry a modest, humble, industrious, prudent young girl named Despina. They had a son, Harlambos, whose godfather was Anastasios, and they developed a very close relationship. Later, Harlambos would follow in the blessed footsteps of his uncle and godfather and join him and Elder Joseph to become a perfect monk in every way. Departure. As soon as Anastasios was free from his obligations, he made the firm decision to become a monk in Jerusalem. His blessed family did not object at all. In fact, they considered it to be their honor, which it was. His Holy Mother advised him, "Be sure to do whatever they do there." He set off for Jerusalem from the Caucasus by foot. It was a 1,000-mile journey under very dangerous conditions. When people met him on the road, they asked him, "Where are you going?" "To the Holy Land," he replied. With great surprise they asked, "But which road are you going to take?" "It doesn't matter. All roads lead to Jerusalem," he responded with his typical simplicity. Even after he left home, his mother still prayed intensely for his salvation. She told his little sister, "Let's go out to our garden." When they got there, she said to her, "I didn't want to come out to the garden to check on it, but to pray for your brother." "Why? He went to become a monk." "Yes, he has gone to become a monk. But has he secured his salvation? He's still just a youngster. Who knows what kind of people are down there? This is why I beseech Christ and the Panagia day and night to help him." What a diligent mother! It was her prayers and tears that helped him and protected him from evil. After all, he was so simple that he would do whatever people told him. In Constantinople. As did most Russian pilgrims on their way to Jerusalem, Anastasios also passed through Constantinople, which was the capital of the Ottoman Empire at the time. While he was searching for a boat that would take him to Palestine, something unexpected happened, as he himself related. A swindler approached me and made out that he was going to show me around. The result was that he took the money that I had for the fare. But that wasn't all. I was not in the least bit suspicious and confided in him my intention of becoming a monk. Having taken all my money with the pretext of getting me a ticket, he took me to a brothel where I was to stay the night. There he told those nice ladies to take special care of me. Since I was exhausted from my trip, I asked that they put me somewhere to sleep. A lady showed me a corner in a corridor. I immediately lay down and slept. But noises, songs, inappropriate conversations, and the like often woke me. At some point it was daybreak. I got up, thanked them, and left. As I came out, an unknown stranger stopped me and asked, "What are you doing here?" I answered, "They brought me here to sleep." "My child, they brought you to a house of ill repute, but your angel protected you. Go now, but next time be careful." Later, when we asked him who that stranger was, he answered with his usual simplicity, "It could have been my guardian angel, or maybe it was Saint Alexios, the man of God." In the Holy Land, Elder Eranimos. Even though Anastasios had lost all his money, by the grace of God he managed to earn enough to pay for the fare for a boat to Palestine. After facing many difficulties, through the prayers of his mother, he finally arrived there in 1910 at the age of 24. During his travels, he passed through the monastery of St. George the Chosabite and the monastery of Temptation. When he tried to kiss the hands of the monks there, they pulled their hands away out of humility because they were not priests. Anastasios likewise said to himself out of humility, "Just look how sinful you are. They don't even let you kiss their hands." Finally, he decided to join the monastery of St. Sabas. He was tonsured a monk at the monastery of Temptation and received the name Anatolios. He was known for his childlike simplicity, his burning faith, and his strong yearning for prayer. At the monastery of St. Sabas, the abbot entrusted him with the responsibilities of the cellar. That is, the responsibilities of the monk in charge of procuring and keeping provisions. In those days, Father Anatolius grew acquainted with a very pious Hierodeacon, Father Basil, who lived from 1883 to 1966, who would later become the renowned Elder Hieronymus of Aegina. He was a great man with many virtues and much prayer, and he was also from Asia Minor. With their common love for noetic prayer and the spiritual life, the two of them quickly bonded with a close spiritual friendship. Every evening after church they met and discussed various spiritual topics and prayed the compunctious prayer together for hours on end. Both of them considered their acquaintance a blessed coincidence. Meanwhile, Father Anatolios' younger sister had become a nun at the age of 16 at the monastery of Theos Skepatos in Pontus. Her new name was Ephraxia. Aflame with divine zeal, she went on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. When she met her brother, he immediately revealed to her the treasure he had found, Father Basil, so that she could also enjoy his wise teachings about prayer. The wise abbot of the monastery allowed Sister Ephraxia to stay in the monastery's guest quarters for a week. During that time, the three of them met every evening, and Father Basil taught them the compunctious prayer until midnight. The teachings and the virtuous life of Father Basil made such an impression on Sister Ephraxia that she chose him to be her elder. Later, when Father Basil ended up in Aegina, she went with him and served him for 47 entire years. After the repose of her beloved elder, this thrice blessed nun was counted worthy of seeing him several times in visions. Leaving the Holy Land. Father Basil remained in the Holy Land for about a year and then left for Constantinople. He thought he would find someone there who could lead him to a loftier spiritual level. Thus Father Anatolios remained by himself, continuing his blessed life of prayer and service. With the passage of time, the counsels of Father Basil set his heart on fire for noetic prayer even more. Since there was no one there to guide him, he said to himself, "What am I sitting around here for? I'll go to Bethlehem." Father Anatolios served as a sacristan for a few years in Bethlehem, where the church paid him for his services. With the money, he bought a silken cassock. He didn't know the value of silk. To him, silk and flax were the same thing. While he was there, he read in the life of St. Mary of Egypt that she had much repentance. The same word, metania, is used in the Greek for both repentance and prostration. Change of direction. Since he wanted to imitate her, he also wanted to do many prostrations and began doing 5,000 every night. In those days, the Holy Land had already begun to lose its peaceful atmosphere. Modern means of travel had opened the way for large groups of pilgrims. Every year the situation was becoming more difficult. Furthermore, young Arab women were frequently asking him to light their candles, take their oil, and so on. Realizing the danger, he said to himself, "Careful, Anatolios, you better get up and leave because you'll get in trouble around here." To the Holy Mountain. One night Father Anatolios had a dream that a heavenly messenger brought him a letter, supposedly from his mother, but it was really from the Panagia. The letter said, "My child, if you want to be saved, come to my garden at the Holy Mountain." Furthermore, he had also heard about the gift of noetic prayer, and the other monks told him to go to the Holy Mountain to find it. After receiving the blessing of his abbot, he set off along with another Pontic monk by train to Alexandria. When they arrived at the train station there, the porters saw his silken cassock and assumed he was rich, so they cordially offered to carry his baggage for him. Seeing such kindness, Father Anatolios said to himself with amazement, "Just look at what good Christians these people are. Not even we monks are so helpful." As soon as they had arrived to where they were going, the porters said to him, "Hand it over." "Hand what over?" "The money." "You mean you take money for carrying my things?" "Humph! What do you think? We do it for free?" "You mean you don't do it out of love for Christ?" "No, Father. How else are we going to make a living?" So he paid them. Later, when he went to eat, the same thing happened. A waiter said to him, "What would you like to eat? We have this, and that." My, what gluttony," he answered. He was so simple that he thought he was expected to eat everything. While he was eating, he was thinking to himself, how hospitable the people are around here. But then, when they unexpectedly asked him to pay, since he had run out of money, he went to Patriarch Photius. The Patriarch was a very generous man, and he gave him enough money for his trip to Mount Athos. On his way there, he passed through Constantinople, where Father Basil helped him obtain permission from the Ottoman rulers to enter the Holy Mountain. On the Holy Mountain. Thirst for noetic prayer. When he got off the boat at Mount Athos, in his simplicity he thought that all the ascetics would come out of their caves to greet him by name. Naturally, however, no one came out to greet him. He thought, what's going on here? How come no one came out to greet me? Wearing his silken cassock, he began looking for a place to live. When the Athonite fathers saw him with such a luxurious cassock, they looked at him strangely. Finally, he learned what the problem was, so he sold his cassock and used the money to commemorate his parents for 40 liturgies. Father Anatolios searched to find someone who could teach him noetic prayer. But since he couldn't find anyone, he decided to join the Brotherhood of Stavrono Nikita. He chose this idiorhythmic monastery so as to have the freedom to struggle and say the prayer more. After spending a few years there, he became a great schema monk with the name Arsenios. When he was in Russia, he worked in a tobacco factory and learned to smoke. When he became a monk, he gave up smoking. This passion, however, can easily come back if one is not careful and an opportunity arises. Since there were a few fathers in that idiorhythmic monastery who smoked, Father Arsenios started smoking again. He also acquired the habit of drinking wine, which is something he had not done in the world. Thus he found himself in a spiritually dangerous situation. However, God did not abandon him because he was very humble and had good intentions. He led him to Francis. Father Arsenios heard that a man with noetic prayer was living ascetically under a boulder. As soon as he heard this, his heart flared up. He prayed to St. Nicholas, "I don't know if it's a sin to abandon my monastery, but if I find him, I will stay there with him if he has noetic prayer." As soon as he had said these words, he heard a voice telling him, "Arsenios, go and save yourself." These were the same words that his patron saint, St. Arsenios the Great, had heard. After receiving the blessing of the monk who had given him the great schema, he quietly tossed his clothes out of the window of his cell at Stavronokida. He then walked out the front gate, went outside his window, took his clothes with him, and he left. He went to Katonakia to the famous elder Daniel and said to him, "I want to find the man with noetic prayer so I can live ascetically with him." "Where are you from?" "Stavronakida." "Oh, you're from an idiorhythmic monastery and you think you can become ascetic, my child?" "Yes, I want to be an ascetic." "Fine, go to such and such a cave where a good young man named Francis is living ascetically. If he wants to keep you there, it will be good. Two are better than one. It will be good for him to have you, since he won't fall into delusion so easily. It will be good for you too, since you'll be in good company." Father Arsenios and Francis meet. As soon as Father Arsenios heard this, he went running to the cave and found Francis there under the boulder. How are you doing in there, my brother Francis? Do you have noetic prayer?" Francis was astonished by such a bold question coming from a monk he didn't even know. "Why do you want to know if I have it?" "Because I also want it. I left Jerusalem for this reason." "Yes, I have noetic prayer. Father, I came here to weep for my sins. Can I come and struggle with you?" "Will you be able to?" "I will." "Do you say prayers?" "Do you do prostrations? Do you weep for your sins?" "I do prostrations and say prayers, but I don't weep for my sins." "You should shed tears and weep for your sins. If you want to stay here and live as an ascetic with me, go ask Elder Daniel for permission." Father Arsenios left much benefited. He went to Elder Daniel and said to him, "He is a very spiritual person. Even in Jerusalem I haven't heard words like this." "Ah, so you have found your friend now," Elder Daniel replied. "I must go there because I am a great sinner, and I need to struggle more. Here the fathers are holy and don't need so much repentance. I have a lot of sins and need to go to a cave. Do I have your blessing?" "Yes, go." He went back to Francis's cave, and with his typical simplicity, he brought him a fig, some rusks, and a stool. "Will you accept me? I brought you a fig and some rusks." Francis thought to himself, "He is a good little soul, nice and simple. All right, stay, we will struggle together." Life with Francis, one soul in two bodies. From that moment on they lived together, 37 years without ever parting. They never let any argument arise. They were like brothers. In the beginning, Father Arsenios was Francis's elder because he was older and already a great schema monk. But when he saw that Francis was not only more spiritual but also more sharper than he was, he conceded the authority to him. One day Father Arsenios said to him, "Will you be obedient to whatever I tell you?" "Yes," replied Francis. "Okay, from now on you will be the elder." In this way Francis became his elder even though he had not yet become a monk. Even so, Francis continued to respect Father Arsenios as if he were his elder. Later, whenever new people would come to be his disciples, he would call them my child, whereas he always called Father Arsenios his brother and co-ascetic. Likewise, in the common gatherings, he always attributed to him the honor of an elder. They were both co-ascetics and co-strugglers, but the real elder was Francis. A little while later, they went to Kyries, and Father Arsenios asked Francis for a blessing to go venerate the miracle-working icon of the Panagia, the awesome protection. In order to test him, Francis told him, "First, you need to do a prostration to me." Father Arsenios started thinking to himself, how can I do a prostration to join him in public, since he is a layman, and I am a great schema monk, 12 years older than he? He started to sweat, looking around 2 or 3 times to see if anyone was watching, and then he finally did a prostration. After passing this test, he never again had any difficulty. Later, Father Arsenios said, I wanted to have Elder Joseph, i.e. Francis, as my elder and guide even though I was older. He had brains, I didn't. He had theoria and was knowledgeable, whereas I had praxis. Once upon a time, 2 people wanted to cross the river. One was blind and the other one was lame. The blind man carried on his shoulders the lame person who could see, and that is how they managed to cross the river. Elder Joseph had his spiritual eyes opened, but he lacked the physical strength I had. I had praxis, I had legs, but I lacked spiritual eyesight. I was not watchful. I took him on my back, and we proceeded. He led me, and we passed the river of this present life. The humility of Father Arsenios. Father Arsenios had brought some bad habits with him from his idiorhythmic monastery. Francis put an end to them right away by agreeing to live with him only under the condition that he would stop doing these things. Since Father Arsenios was also a hardy ascetic, he accepted those restrictions without complaint. Besides, he could see that Francis's advice was for his salvation. Francis told him, that is not good, and you will need to stop doing this too. Either correct yourself and start behaving properly, or leave. Janem, I'll correct myself. You say, Janem, I'll correct myself, but you keep doing it. Come on, be patient. Francis made Father Arsenios holy. He was so strict and silent, that when Father Arsenios started to say, Father so-and-so did this and that, Francis immediately interrupted him and said, look, what other people do out there is none of our business. It is forbidden to talk about what other people are doing. We need to pay attention to what we are doing. A little while later, Father Arsenios forgot himself and started to say, Father so-and-so passed by. What a negligent monk he is. He didn't even finish what he was saying before Francis slapped him and abruptly said to him, Don't talk. Don't say anything about anyone. Who are you to judge? Shame on you. Say the prayer. Fine, I won't do it again. A few hours later, though, something else would slip out. So-and-so was, bam, another slap. What now, Janem? What did I say? What did you say? What you said was enough to deprive you of the blessing of prayer. What else do you want? Okay, I won't do it again. Don't say anything at all, Arsenios. A little while later, Iero Arsenios would forget and say, So-and-so is not doing very well. Bam! Yerenda whacked him right on the cheek. That's criticism. You slipped again. That's criticism? What do you think it is, Arsenios? Silence. Close your mouth. What do you care? Ah, Janem, you always hit. If we lose grace, where are we going to find it again? One time Francis lifted up his hand to scratch his head. Father Arsenios thought that he was going to get it hit again, so he quickly raised his hands to protect himself. Father Arsenios was such a good-natured struggler that he tolerated everything with a brave spirit. Just think of what humility he had. He was 36 years old and had already been a monk for 12 years, yet he overlooked this and was obedient to a young 24-year-old layman. This can only be achieved with a great internal struggle and forcefulness. Father Arsenios patiently accepted all of his strict regiment throughout his career, his entire life, and God rewarded him with much grace for this valiant resignation. Years would pass before Father Arsenios was overshadowed by grace. It took so long because he first had to destroy the passions stemming from his bad habits. Then one night, 8 years later, Father Arsenios fell at Yeranda's feet and wept. Through his tears he said, "O Yeranda, what is this that you gave me tonight through your prayers? I was filled with light, inside and outside." Christ came and smiled at me. Upon hearing this, Yeranda also wept for joy and said, "Yes, that is it, Arsenios." Their schedule. Francis and Father Arsenios received their monastic schedule from the holy ascetic Elder Daniel, the Hesychas. Later, Francis would in turn pass it on to his disciples, and they would give it to their many brotherhoods within Mount Athos, throughout Greece and abroad. It was a new, tested, holy schedule, which the two ascetics tailored to their own needs as follows. In the afternoon they would eat together. Their meal consisted of only 3 ounces of rusks, which is as much as would fit a tin can if they had. Then they would retire to their cells to rest and sleep only 3 to 4 hours, but Francis wouldn't sleep lying down. He usually slept upright in a chair. At sunset, they would wake up to begin their vigil. They would not speak to each other so that they would not ruin the clarity of mind that sleep had granted them. They would silently drink some black coffee or just chew on coffee beans as an aid, and then if it was winter, they withdrew to their cells for an all-night vigil. So that the coffee would not irritate their empty stomachs, they would also eat an orange or an apple if they had any. If it was summer, they did their vigil outdoors in separate places. They began their vigil with the Trisagion, the Creed, and Psalm 50. Then they sat for a while and meditated on death, hell, the joy of the righteous in heaven, and other thoughts that would benefit their souls. They concluded this stage of contemplation with the thought that everyone else would be saved, while only they would go to hell. In this manner, they would not spend a great deal of time in that stage of contemplation. As soon as their nous was collected and their heart was contrite, they began saying the prayer. Francis said it noetically, whereas Father Arsenios quietly whispered it. They usually did noetic prayer standing up with absolute concentration, humility, and contrition, battling against sleep for 7 or 8 hours while keeping their nous in their heart. Afterwards, they began doing prostrations, usually about 3,500. When it was cold, they did more to keep warm. They rarely lit their wood stove because the heat would make them drowsy. After finishing their prostrations, they fulfilled their obligatory monastic requirements by doing the services on their prayer robes. After all that, whenever it was possible, they would go to a neighboring brotherhood to attend Divine Liturgy. They usually preferred to go to Elder Daniel the Hesychas' liturgy, but this was not always possible, especially in winter, when the snow closed all the paths. By the end of the Divine Liturgy, the sun had risen, and they drank some tea and had some rusks. If they were exhausted from the toil of their night vigil, they would sometimes rest for an hour in the morning. When they got up, they would pray some more or go looking for ascetics who could benefit them. In this manner, the two ascetics lived like angels. Their asceticism. They lived a strict ascetical life in obscurity with obedience to Elder Daniel the Hesychas and worshipped God in prayer throughout the night. One day after a big snowfall, Francis said to Father Arsenios, "Why don't we go to our spiritual father and receive communion?" "Let's go," Father Arsenios replied. But let's go barefoot for more asceticism, just like all those saints who walked barefoot. Father Arsenios replied, "All right, let's go like that." They set off and walked a few hours barefoot in the snow, through the ravines and over the rocks, until they reached cold streams. This area received its name from the streams there that are ice cold even in the summer. When they arrived there, Francis's feet had frozen and he couldn't proceed any farther. Even though Father Arsenios was 12 years older than Francis, he was the tougher and stronger one because Francis had become somewhat weak from all the asceses. "Father Arsenios, let's sit down. I can't go any further." Later, Father Arsenios related, "My feet had become warm, and I could have gone farther, but since Francis's feet had frozen, we stayed there. It was still night, though, and they had no place to stay, so they dug their way down to the ground through the snow, found some wood, and lit a fire to keep warm. To keep from falling asleep and freezing to death, they also did prostrations all night long. At daybreak, Francis said, 'Father Arsenios, let's go back. We won't make it all the way to Elder Daniel like this. Since we're closer to our hut, let's go back home and not imagine that we can do this kind of asceses.' A few days later he said, 'Father Arsenios, you had better go to our spiritual father and to the great laver to ask for some rusks, olives, and a little oil.' 'All right, I'll go, Yerunda.' This time Father Arsenios went with his shoes on. When he reached cold streams, he met a cave-dwelling monk with his donkeys, who said to him, 'Father Arsenios, there are barefoot ascetics around here.' 'How do you know?' 'We saw their footprints.' Father Arsenios thought to himself, if they only knew it was us. 'Think of that,' continued the monk. 'We have barefoot ascetics here without even knowing it. They must be living ascetically in some unknown caves.' 'Probably,' Father Arsenios replied. What else could he say? Extreme asceses. Father Arsenios heard that many saints wore hair shirts directly on their skin. He tried doing this, but it was difficult because the thick hairs punctured his skin like needles, and his whole body became full of wounds. He was patient for an entire year before he decided to stop this excessively harsh asceses. In general, they sacrificed their youth with laborious asceses. They disregarded their life and scorned it, so to speak, in order to win the grace of God. Once Francis decided to remain standing all night in prayer for the sake of asceses. He remained standing and motionless for 12 hours while keeping his nous from wandering away from his heart. In order to accomplish this ascetical feat, he devised a special kind of cane that was shaped like the letter T. By leaning on this cane, he is able to remain standing the entire night, praying both with and without his prayer rope. He even tried tying a rope to the ceiling and passing it under his armpits to help him remain upright. One day, after many days of fasting and all-night standing, he fell down out of sheer exhaustion and hit his head. Hours later, when he regained consciousness, he couldn't figure out why his head hurt, why his oil lamp was broken with its oil all over the floor, and why his cane was not in his hand. After fully coming to his senses, he realized that he must have fallen asleep while reading Compline and knocked down the oil lamp beside him. Who knows how many sleepless nights he had had. He struggled hard against sleep because he saw in practice that no ascesis brings as many blessings as deprivation of sleep for the sake of prayer. Compliments. Sleep battled against Francis throughout his youth on the Holy Mountain. This battle tired him, especially during winter, since it was too cold for him to fight sleep by going outside. The warfare was not just from the natural desire to sleep, but also from the demons who despise vigils with noetic prayer. Many times he and Father Arsenios would do prostrations barefoot in the snow to overcome their drowsiness. Only once in his life did Francis not wake up for his vigil. One day Papa Ananias said to him, "Yeronda, is there anyone else in the entire holy mountain who mindfully and seriously practices hesychism with praxis and theoria? I doubt it. You are the only one." He was momentarily enticed by this compliment, and he looked as if he were in a daze. But a second later he regained his senses and exclaimed, "Get behind me, Satan!" and punched himself on the thigh with all his might. "Forgive me, my God." As a penance for him, God allowed him to be so sleepy the following night that he slept right through his vigil until late in the morning. Instead of working that day, he did his prayer rule to make up for neglecting it. After experiencing how easy it is to accept vainglorious thoughts and seeing how much damage they do, he later wrote to someone, "Be careful not to compliment one another in each other's presence, for if compliments harm the perfect, how much more harmful they will be to you who are still weak." Section 4. Life with Elder Ephraim the Barrel Maker. Submission to Elder Ephraim. Genuine eldership. After Francis had been on Mount Athos for 2 or 3 years, and had been with Father Arsenios for about a year, the wise Elder Daniel of Katonakia said to them, "You aren't accomplishing anything like this. Now you will listen to me. Here on the Holy Mountain there is a tradition. In order to become an elder, you need to bury an elder. In other words, you need to have an elder and be obedient to him until his death in order to become an elder. The two of you, however, will not succeed because you are living idiorhythmically. You," pointing to Father Arsenios, "have left from your place of obedience, and you," pointing to Francis, "have not become a great schema monk yet. Without the blessing of an elder, nothing succeeds in monasticism. Without the seal of a spiritual father, no spiritual work bears fruit. If you want to have the grace of God all your life, you must first pass under obedience." "But where can we go?" asked Francis. "Don't worry, my children," Elder Daniel continued. "I see the calling you have for prayer. Nearby in our neighborhood, at the cell of the Annunciation, there are 2 little old monks, Ephraim and Joseph. They won't live very long, 5 or 10 years at most. Indeed, they would only live for another 7 years. If you receive their blessing, then you are free to continue struggling as you please. Then you can do whatever you want. So go and be obedient to them, take care of them in their old age, and when they die, you, Francis, will become a normal elder." Since both of them were full of zeal to do the will of God, they followed his advice without hesitation. In fact, they considered it to be a real revelation, as if it had come straight from the mouth of God. So they went and submitted themselves in obedience to the little old monks, Joseph and Ephraim, the barrel maker. The simple old men. The elders Ephraim and Joseph were simple, good, and guileless old men. They were from northern Epirus, and they lived together in Katonakia in the cell of the Annunciation, a little lower down from Elder Daniel. When Elder Ephraim was a layman, he married and had 8 children. He lived with great piety and gradually began to desire the monastic life. His wife, however, did not want him to let him leave, so he prayed fervently that God would find a way for him to become a monk. It was not long before his children started dying one by one. As soon as his wife realized what was happening, she said with trembling, "Quickly get up and go become a monk, so that at least 1 or 2 of my children will survive and be around to console me." Without waiting for her to change her mind, he seized the opportunity and immediately went to Katonakia and became a monk alongside his relative who was already there, Father Joseph. They were disciples of Father Nicodemus of Dionysiou, who was a learned writer and Hesychas, and had built the cell of the Annunciation at Katonakia.
An example of their asceticism and their simplicity is the following story. Once, when Elder Ephraim was bringing dinner to his elder Joseph, he dropped the pot on the ground. The pot broke, and the pasta in it scattered all over the ground. When he told his elder what had happened, he replied with simplicity and forbearance, "Eh, then we'll just eat it there." And so they did, in fact, eat their pasta right off the ground. Love for the elders. Francis and Father Arsenios went to these blessed old monks at the end of 1923. Elder Ephraim didn't know how to express his joy for the obedience and assistance of his two new disciples. He was frequently moved to tears, seeing their eagerness and their perfect obedience. With all his might, Francis dedicated himself to blessed obedience in order to please his elders. He loved them even more than himself. He didn't treat obedience as a chore, but he served the old monks with the joy that flows from love. For when you truly love someone, you spontaneously do whatever you can to make that person happy. Young Francis quickly realized from his own experience that the more reverence one has for one's elder, the more grace one receives. He would constantly teach this great lesson to all who would later come to him for advice. Fruits of obedience. Francis and Father Arsenios behaved like angels towards their elders. They prepared the food, cleaned the house, and did whatever was necessary with joy and love. In fact, they even tried to foresee what the elders would need in order to please them more. They had so much reverence for those old monks that they were even more obedient to them than children are to their real parents. For this is the true meaning of obedience: to remove your ego from the center of your soul and to place God and your elder there. It was not long before they saw the fruits of their obedience. Because of their obedience, it was natural that they had found great ease in prayer. In this way, Francis realized from his own experience why the Holy Fathers praised holy obedience. He began to understand what the Holy Fathers meant when they said, "A disciple in the depths of his soul breathes God and his elder like an innocent baby." Throughout that entire period, he had the gift of tears which ran ceaselessly like a river. His heart was aflame with love for God and his spiritual father. Ever since then, Francis held holy obedience as the foremost virtue. He emphasized no other virtue more than this one. In fact, he later wrote to someone, "Personally, I've never seen anything more comforting in my soul than perfect obedience." The call. Under the protection of blessed obedience to the elders Ephraim and Joseph, Francis and Father Arsenios began their great struggles. It was during that time that Francis engaged in the most fierce and relentless battle of his monastic life, with the demon of fornication. One night, while Francis was saying the prayer with stillness, a light suddenly filled the place, and he came to Theoria. He himself related this vision as follows: "My nous was raptured up to a plain. I beheld monks there, lined up for battle, according to rank. A tall general approached me and said, 'Do you want to enter and fight in the front line?' And I answered that I greatly desire to duel with the Ethiopians on the other side, who were screaming and breathing fire like wild dogs, and whose mere sight aroused fear. Even so, I was not afraid, because I had so much fury that I could have ripped them apart with my teeth. It is true, though, that even as a layman I had very brave soul. So then the general separated me from the lines where there was a multitude of fathers. After we passed 3 or 4 lines in the regiment, he brought me to the front line, where there were only 1 or maybe 2 monks face to face with the ferocious demons. The demons were ready to rush against us, but I was also breathing fire and fury against them. He left me there and added, 'I shall not hinder, but shall help whoever desires to fight bravely against them.' Then I came to myself once more and reflected, I wonder what kind of war is this going to be? Carnal warfare. From then on, fierce carnal warfare began, in which the demons did not let him have a moment's rest, day or night. Every night was a ferocious struggle, and every day was full of thoughts and passions. He couldn't get any sleep because every time he closed his eyes and he began to sleep, the warfare intensified. He slept standing up in a corner or sitting in a special wooden stool with armrests that he himself had made. He passed 8 entire years without lying down to sleep, that is, as long as it took for the carnal warfare to pass. It is worth emphasizing that he had never had any past experience with carnal sins and was completely chaste. Nevertheless, God allowed this warfare to be intense, not only so that he could show his good intentions, but also so that he would later be able to guide others to the fragrant pastures of chastity. He would pray with tears and agony of heart, "My dear Panagia, I want complete purity and virginity. I don't want this sinful pleasure, my dear lady." Francis struggled intensely because he was completely aware of what was happening. Besides, it was in his character never to give in to anything improper. He fasted strictly and kept vigil all night. He only partook of dry bread and water. When he would reach the limits of exhaustion, grace would strengthen him, and thus he would continue his fearsome struggle. The more time passed, the tougher the demon's warfare became. It was nearly incessant. But he too was full of rage against them. He was so courageous that he said to the demons, "Either I'll devour you or you'll devour me." This is why he never lost a single battle against the demons. With such dedication to fight till death, how could the grace of God not help him and raise him to lofty spiritual states? The intensity of the struggle. Every evening he sat down and prayed noetically for 6 hours without letting his noose leave his heart. He synchronized the invocation of Christ's name with his breathing. "The pangs of death have encompassed me. The perils of Hades have found me." In fact, he strained himself so much that his sweat ran as if from a faucet. He had a cane for hitting himself on his calves and especially on his thighs. He beat himself mercilessly 2 or 3 times daily, which left permanent indentations on his thighs. He later wrote, "I broke my canes on my thighs before subjugating my body. I stood like a torturer over myself. My whole body trembled when it saw that I was about to lay hold of a cane. The demons fled, the passions were pacified, comfort came, and my soul rejoiced. For it is a law of God. Whatever causes sensual pleasure is cured by pain." He continued begging God to have pity on him and to remove the warfare from him, but the assaults continued. It is very likely that contemporary monastics and struggling laymen will wonder why this young ascetic beat himself so mercilessly. Even though it sounds horrible, it is not a sign of mental instability, nor is it the only such instance in ascetical literature. God has revealed through various miracles that he accepted this form of ascesis as a martyrdom. The sayings of the Desert Fathers and the latter are full of similar ascetical struggles in which the body is not being punished, but rather being subdued to the ruling nous. The aim of Orthodox asceticism is to kill the passions, not the body. Divine consolation. Even though Francis was living under obedience with prayer, tears, and ascesis, these harsh attacks continued unabated. It was during this period in his life that he encountered intense inflictions and bitter temptations which were necessary for him to be purified of his passions. He wept, he sighed, he implored the Most Holy Theotokos, who frequently comforted him, but no solution was in sight. Occasionally the warfare would subside and he would have a brief respite, and then it would return with even more intensity. His body began to collapse under the pressure of the struggle, and his courage began to waver as he perceived an apparent impasse. Thus the young spiritual athlete began to lose courage. Sorrow and despair began to envelop him. At this time God granted him a vision to console him. It was near St. Basil's, on a summer's night with a full moon. His heart was heavy, and grace was providing him with no comfort. He was falling into despair because he had no one who could listen to his pain. and therefore he kept it all bottled up inside himself. Since he had no other way to find relief, he decided to visit his spiritual father, Elder Daniel the Hesychas, so that he could at least tell him his thoughts and receive communion. And then the following happened, as he himself would later write to a spiritual daughter of his. After arriving, I stood a short distance away on top of a rock so that I would not disturb their vigil of noetic prayer. It must have been 10 o'clock at night. As I was sitting and saying the prayer noetically, I heard the sweet voice of a bird singing, and my nous was raptured by the voice. I followed it to see where the bird was, carefully looking here and there. As I was searching, I entered a beautiful meadow and proceeded on a road as white as snow, with diamond and crystalline walls. Inside the walls were all kinds of golden-hued flowers. So my nous forgot about the bird and was entirely captivated beholding that paradise. As I went farther, I saw a tall, splendid palace, amazing both nous and intellect. In the door stood our Panagia, carrying our sweetest Jesus as an infant in her arms. She was all white as snow and glittered, and I approached and kissed her with infinite love, and she embraced me like an infant and said something to me. I cannot forget the love she showed me as a true mother. Then without fear or shyness I went up to her, just as I would approach her icon, and did what a small and innocent child would do when he sees his sweet mother. I still do not know how I left her side, for my nous had been entirely engulfed from above. I departed from there on another road and came back to the meadow where there was a beautiful mansion. There they gave me something as a blessing and told me, "Here is the bosom of Abraham. It is customary for us to give a blessing to anyone who passes by here." So I passed by there as well and came to myself, and I was leaning against the rock once again. After this I abandoned the purpose for which I had gone, and went down full of joy to venerate the icon of the Panagia in the cave of St. Athanasius the Athonite, because I had great reverence for her. I had stayed there 6 months in the beginning out of love for her, and used to light her oil lamp. Night and day I meditated on her. So while I was wholly captive that night by divine love, I went down to thank her. And as soon as I went inside and venerated her, I was standing across from her icon and was thanking her. So much fragrance, like a refreshing breath of air, emanated from her sweet mouth, and that it filled my soul, and I remained speechless in a second ecstasy for a long time. And when the chapel's caretaker came up to attend to the oil lamps, I fled as if I were delirious, just in case he perceived something and started asking me questions. Later, when he related these visions to us, we asked him, "Yerunda, what work did you do so that the Panagia would appear to you and embrace you?" And he replied, "Through self-reproach and self-knowledge, I have realized my wretchedness." What are you?" I asked myself. "Nothing. You aren't even a worm. When grace comes to a man, it makes him God. But when it departs from him, then he is ready to fall into every heresy, every delusion, every moral deviation, and even damnation. Everything is supported by the grace of God. But grace also has its requirements before it will dwell in man. It seeks his good intentions, his willpower, and his struggle. Together with grace, man becomes an angel. Without grace, he deviates and becomes a demon. Because he pondered on such thoughts for hours every day, they became second nature to him. Knowing himself so deeply gave him the humility to be capable of receiving lofty gifts from God without being prideful about them. He often admitted, "If the grace of God leaves me, I will do the worst crimes, because we all have the seeds in our souls, both the good and the bad. Whichever prevail as a result of our own volition will take control. How many people there have been who cast out demons and then fell?" The warfare intensifies. After this vision, no one would expect that the warfare would have ended. On the contrary, the struggle became even tougher. The peace lasted only a few days, and then the carnal warfare returned twice as strong. He consoled himself through tears and prayer, but there were times that the grace of God withdrew, and then the struggle became intolerable. Through prayer and watchfulness over his thoughts, he continuously struggled to keep his nous clear. He also constantly beat himself so that the pain would neutralize the carnal pleasure. But the more he prayed, the fiercer the demons became, because they saw that this young ascetic was trying to elude their traps. And, as if all this were not enough, the demons constantly whispered to him in thoughts, "You will not accomplish anything. We will crush you. In vain do you struggle. How long will you last?" New assaults of unclean thoughts and intense carnal burning assailed him. Again the demons tried to darken his nous with thoughts of despair, telling him, "It is impossible to escape from our hands." Yet the young ascetic did not lay down his weapons. He was extremely patient, prayed day and night, and did thousands of prostrations. Physical warfare from the demons. As if this warfare were not enough, the demons physically beat him out of envy. Every night was a real martyrdom. Some would grab his hair, others would grab his feet, his hands, and his beard, which had not grown long yet. Entire battalions of demons rushed at him and tortured him and shouted together, "Choke him! Kill him!" And it wasn't just 1 or 2 nights, but continued on for 8 whole years. In the beginning, like a fierce lion, he fought against the demons as if they were physical entities. He would grab one of the demons and use him like a club to hit the other demons. He would also punch those evil spirits as if they were material entities. Most of the time, however, his punches passed right through the demons as if he were punching the air. As a result, he ended up bruising his hands against the walls. The walls of his cell were destroyed by all the fighting inside. In the end, young Francis learned through his own experience that it is primarily with the name of Christ and the Panagia that the demons are defeated. As soon as they heard him invoke the name of Christ and the Panagia with love and hope, their might dissipated like smoke. "Hurry, my dear Panagia," he would cry from the depths of his heart. He felt his prayers coming out of his mouth like flames while he continued punching them. Immediately the demons would leave shouting, "He burned us! He burned us!" Even so, his titanic struggle continued every day without waning. Once he told me, "One day as I was just sitting there, I began to weep and said, 'What is this, my dear God? I am barely eating anything and struggling so hard, yet I still can't win. He's going to destroy me.' Not even 10 minutes passed, and suddenly Satan, that scum, grabbed me by the neck to choke me. Full of rage, I grabbed his side and bit him with my teeth. The bite was so tangible that I felt his hairs touch my lips. I came to myself after biting him, and I sensed such a stench that I couldn't stay in my cell. I leaped out of my cell, and it still reeked." Despite these difficulties, he frequently experienced the help of the most holy Theotokos during his bloody fights, and he realized that the Panagia especially loves chastity. This is why he fought against the carnal passion more than any other passion. He wrote, "I cannot describe to you how much our Panagia loves chastity and purity. Since she is the only pure virgin, she wants and loves everyone to be pure like that." Final victory. To make things worse, the other monks called Francis deluded and avoided him because they lacked experience of such supernatural struggles. After almost 8 years of ceaseless and intense carnal warfare, by then his elder Ephrem had already made Francis a great schema monk with the name Joseph. On the last day when Christ was about to deliver him, he was pondering in despair, "Since my body has broken down as if completely dead, and since my passions are active as if I were perfectly healthy, the demons have won. Surely they have burned and defeated me, instead of my beating them." And then he was finally delivered from this warfare in the following way, as he himself described later. "As I was sitting there wounded, despairing, and virtually dead, I perceived that the door opened and someone entered. I did not turn to see who it was, though, but kept saying the prayer. Suddenly I felt that beneath me someone was stimulating me toward sensual pleasure. I turned and saw the scurvy demon, whose wounded head stank. Then like a wild beast I dashed to grab him. However, as soon as I grabbed him, he had hairs like a pig. He disappeared. He left the sensation of his hairs on my fingers and the smell of his stench in my nose. At last, from that moment on, the war ended. All the turmoil ceased. Peace came to my soul, and I was completely freed from the filthy passions of the flesh. All night long he thanked God, who had not forgotten him. He jubilantly chanted the ode that the prophet Moses sang when Pharaoh was defeated. Horse and rider hath he hurled into the sea. In the morning, tired from his long vigil, he went into ecstasy and had the following vision as he himself related. I saw a spacious place that was separated by a sea. In this spacious place traps were strewn everywhere, but they were hidden so that they would not show. I was in a place very high up, and I saw everything as if in a theater. All the monks had to pass through this area, and in the sea was an enraged dragon, a horrifying demon whose eyes emitted flames. He would stick out his head to see if the monks were getting caught in the traps. As they passed by without fear or caution, one was caught by the neck, another by the waist, another one by the foot, another by the hand, and seeing this the demon laughed with delight and exultation. But I was greatly distressed and cried, O evil demon, the things you do to us, and how you deceive us. Then he came to himself with both joy and grief. Joy because he had seen the snares of the devil, grief because he perceived the dangers that we face our entire lives. After this final victory of his, he admitted to one of his spiritual children, I was given the gift of purity, the gift of not differentiating between women and men. The passion is not roused within me at all. By the Lord's grace I received the gift of purity, in full knowledge of what I was receiving. Through his indomitable determination, Father Joseph attained his lofty state, even though he had not yet reached the age of 32. From his own experience, he was able to teach his spiritual children. When a person struggles to keep his body pure and his nous chaste from filthy thoughts, his life and his prayer ascend like fragrant incense to the heavens. I have seen in practice what I am telling you. There is no sacrifice to God more fragrant than chastity of the body which is obtained with a bloody and dreadful struggle. I have much to say about this blessed chastity, the fruit of which I have tasted and eaten, but you are not able to bear now what I would say. Only one thing shall I tell you now. When such people change their underclothes, which happens every 3 to 6 months, they give off a fragrance that spreads throughout the entire house, as if a refreshing vial of myrrh had been opened. This is a sign from God of blessed chastity and their most holy virginity. First victory over anger. The carnal passion was not the only passion Francis had to fight. He had to learn that anger, which is the power of the soul, given to us by God to fight off the passions and demonic attacks, cannot be misused by directing it at our fellow human beings. One day, a Cretan monk started to shout at Elder Ephraim unjustly regarding the boundary between their huts. The Cretan monk lost his temper and started calling Elder Ephraim all kinds of names. Since Elder Ephraim was meek and simple, he didn't want to talk back to him, but kept saying, "What is going on here? What is he doing to me?" Francis, who was young and still had his passions alive within him, heard what was happening, and immediately his anger flared up. His heart began to pound quickly, his blood was boiling, and his thinking was starting to blur. Full of indignation, he rolled up his sleeves and decided to go out there and beat up their rude neighbor who was unfairly harassing his elder. But since their neighbor was also strong, Francis first went into the chapel to seek from the Panagia the strength to deal with him. Naturally, the Panagia would never fully fulfill such a request. Instead, she granted him a change of heart. He immediately threw himself on the floor of the chapel with tears and sobs, calling upon the Panagia to restrain him. "Help me now, my dear Panagia, so that I don't go out there. Help me, save me, Christ. Because if I go out now, who knows what's going to happen? Help me, save me, pacify my passion." After weeping and wailing and soaking the ground with a torrent of tears, the passion of anger subsided, and he was calm and able to think clearly. Thus transformed, he calmly went out, took care of the issue with much love and sweetness, saying to the Cretan monk, "This is not so important. We haven't come here to acquire huts and olive trees and rocks. We came here for our souls. We came for love. If we lose love, we have lost God. We will leave everything else behind, but love and hatred are things we will take with us." And what's the point, Yerunda? If we who have given up our parents and so many other things now argue over this, we will be humiliated before angels, men, and all of creation. Because Francis spoke with so much love and tranquility, the arguing monks not only calmed down, but even became friends. Later, Francis admitted to us, "If the Panagia hadn't transformed my anger that day, I might have even killed that monk because I was so strong and fiery then that I could take on 10 people at once and beat them all. This was my first victory as a beginner. Ever since then, I could feel that my passion of anger had diminished, and meekness began to caress my heart." That boorish monk created many other problems for Francis. Francis was extremely patient, however, as can be seen from the following excerpt from his letters. "If I wanted to relate everything I went through on a daily basis with this passion of anger, I would have to write a book. Since God wanted to free me from it, he would bring about everything appropriate. People would bother me unjustly, they would insult me, they would annoy me, and they would not just simply tempt me, but they would do things that would make you commit murder. But by enduring and choking Satan within me with extreme patience, I was delivered from the evil."